Welcome everyone to TVOSJ. Let's try one more time. Welcome everyone to TVOSJ. Oh, here we go. Okay, welcome everyone to TVOSJ.org, the voice of San Joaquin. Also, 89.5 FM KBCC Tracy. Of course, we are a local nonprofit multimedia community broadcasting network right here in Stockton, California. And now we're going to be starting a new show called Heritage Writers Club. And welcome, guys. Welcome to your community radio.
Thank you, and good afternoon, radio listeners across San Joaquin County and media watchers across the globe. Welcome to the Heritage Writers community and a presentation of the work of our writers, poets, essayists, storytellers. I'll tell you a little bit about Heritage Writers community a little later on, but right now I want to tell you about what we're going to try to present today. Our theme is about love, to warm you up for Valentine's Day a little later on in the month. And we have a wonderful cast here today presenting their original work, full of feeling, insights, and mindfulness. You've already heard from the music of Tomo, except you haven't because he's stuck on the freeway in an accident. And if he comes in later, we'll play the intro music for you then. And more of him later. You'll also hear from Dr. Jose Cantu, Ann Struck, Jim Fox, and I'm your host, Robert Reinarts. But before we get to all that, we have a couple of professional development components that may interest you. I'd like to give you a little writing tip. So get out your pencils and notepads and let Dr. Cantu give you a few suggestions. Jose.
Yes, thank you, Robert. Let me just introduce a brief tip about guide to writing fiction. I suppose the place to start is to define fiction. What is fiction? The term fiction applies to invented stories and characters. That's simple. Nonfiction works are generally research-based, factual narratives. The difficulty in differentiating between the two is sometimes encountered when the fictional account includes historical events and historical characters to create an invented narrative. A historical novel, for example, allows a writer to blend factual elements from history with fictional dialogue, invented characters, and invented events. A historical novel allows the writer to blend factual elements from history with fictional dialogue and or with invented characters. Tom Hanks comes to mind in his movie Forrest Gump, which includes scenes with President Kennedy, a startup company called Apple, the beginning of the running craze, discontent with the Vietnam War, and Alabama footballs with their legendary coach Bear Bryant. All of these things did happen. That is, there was a President Kennedy, there was a startup company called Apple, there was a beginning of a running craze, etc. All of these things did happen, but Forrest Gump did not. He was a fictional character surrounded by factual events that occurred in America's time of social upheaval. In like manner, some nonfiction writers use creative license to tell a factual story. The life story of the great composer Irving Berlin, for example, as told by creative license of Hollywood's imagination, was not true. Cary Grant played the lead role. He was shown to have been a Yale graduate, a naval officer who was wounded in action. He was even shown to have composed one of his most haunting melodies when they began the begin during the lull of battle. Whereas it made for a great story with a very handsome lead actor, the Hollywood version was not true. Of course, it also grossed many millions of dollars. In fact, I even have the movie in what is it, HBS, and regrettably I don't have it on DVD, but it's a great story. In fact, I even know one gentleman who wrote a story about Hitler and Hitler's son. Well, the story of Hitler is true. We, however, have no recorded account of him having had a son, but it made for an interesting story. The use of such license, however, often leads to confusion between what is fiction and what is nonfiction. In fact, one author once published a fictional account of his encounter with an alien being. It didn't sell. He therefore reissued the exact same story under a nonfiction umbrella. He made a nice and tidy sum. Examples of fiction. Let me give you a couple examples. Fairy tales, Cinderella, storybook heroes, Captain Marvel, Batman. I love Daredevil.
Hooray.
Yeah, I love them all. Science fiction stories, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Love that stuff. Spook shoots, Frankenstein, vampires, Abraham Lincoln, the vampire hunter, Harry Potter, you name and continue naming. Examples of nonfiction, life stories with minimal creative license, and they were great stories. You may remember them. The story of Miracle, the 1980 Olympic team that won the gold medal in the Olympics. Running Brave, the story of Billy Mills, a great runner who won the 10,000 meter event in the Olympics. A true story about an Indian boy who, by the way, now is a retired resident of Sacramento, California. One Shining Season, another great story of a young runner in the New Mexico University who beat all of the runners of his day, but sadly passed away on his last season. Fear Strikes Out, PT 109, the story of John F. Kennedy, and of course with creative license, the life story of Irving Berlin. Talk about elements of fiction. Because writing is an art and not a science, it is difficult to specify which elements the author will utilize in writing his story, or to even attempt to guarantee the elements that each of the elements will present in the story. Storytelling is not a science. It cannot be subjected to scrutiny of the scientific method of disclosure. At best, all we can do is consider the elements of fiction. And the first point to consider, in terms of my guide for tonight, is the plot, the storyline. The storyline is the plan, the scheme, the design, the narrative, or the intrigue. Plot is what gives your fiction life. Do you have a story to tell? The scene most generally opens with the norm, the normal things that normally happen. What is normal? Something then triggers the scene to movement. Something begins to energize the entire plot. Something gets the ball rolling. I have a story that I call The Tale of the Grim Slave, which I have no time to share today. But it begins with a sense of collision. Something happens that gets the ball rolling. And it is seen in what others say about him. This happens that to keep your story from becoming stale, you may, or what happened in his past to shape his actions now. I'm just beginning to make use of this method with some degree of success. It's kind of like show and tell. I'd love to get into a little more by giving you an example of that, but if I may, I'd like to wait a little longer in the broadcast if time permits.
Fine. Okay, let me interject a little piece here about we call what's going on around town. It's gonna be an approximate entry now because it hasn't fully developed yet. But I want to make sure that we give credit to other organizations and writers that are active in this county. It's a big place and there's a lot of groups. Notably, Tuliberg Press. This coming month, they have a class on calligraphy, one on paper marbling, one on Coptic sketchbook journals, and then they have a storytelling episode with Manuel Camacho. You can find out when and where on their website. Heritage Writers Community meets at the Hagen Museum on the first Thursday of each month from 6 to 8, and you're welcome and encouraged if you want to move your career ahead a little bit and learn some things and acquire some new skills. Drop by and give us a visit. We'd be glad to see you. Let's see. Let's talk to Mr. Jim Fox. Jim is a published author. He's published a lot of his material on the back porch, is it, Jim?
That was one of the periodicals. I have over a dozen short stories that were published in a multitude of periodicals. So,
Okay.
Scouting magazine, which is for the leadership of the Boy Scouts, was kind of my first published article. But yeah, they're all small short stories. Dr. Cantu mentioned that there's a difference between fiction and nonfiction, and I tend to write in kind of a meld between that, which is creative nonfiction, and that's when you recall a story, maybe the main details, but you have to fill in the missing details. And that's been the genre I've worked in. I have done some fiction, and I'm currently working on a historical novel based on a true incident.
We've all done this historical novel thing, you and I, and Jose.
Yes.
I don't know whether Ann has or not.
No, I have a historical play that I'm working on.
We're all looking back. Okay, since this is this theme right now is heading into Valentine's Day, I thought I would share a story written some time ago. I called it Fire and Ice, and it was published in the Front Porch periodical as one of the ones that you mentioned, Robert. Fire and Ice. The love of my life married me. We're now 4 decades into our marriage, but still, the fact that Marcia ever married me is a surprise, especially when I think back to a fateful evening at a swanky restaurant. At the time, we were both in college and money was tight, but I was able to find a nice restaurant that was within my budget. Luckily, we had been seated in a cozy booth with a candle flickering romantically in the tabletop centerpiece. I guess the waitress there must have recognized that we were a young couple out on a dinner date. Although she professionally attended to our needs, she didn't hover around our table as we engaged in the small talk and nervous banter of 2 people getting to know each other. We'd been on a few dates, and I really liked Marcia, but she wasn't being very talkative. So I was nervous, hoping that the evening was going well. Then, while Marcia seemed to be listening attentively to my verbal meanderings, I picked up that fateful water glass. Now, let me confess, I have always had a bad habit of sipping the water out of a glass until I can toss back the bits of ice to munch on, and that's what I did on our date. But perhaps the waitress was a little too efficient. I swear I had not seen her come by and refill my water glass. So, boosh! I tossed a whole glass of ice water into my face. Marcia held out stone-faced for about 20 seconds. Then, with a gasp at having suppressed a laugh, she exploded into laughter. Then, still giggling and with tears in her eyes, she dabbed at my face and shirt collar with her napkin. Well, it must have been love at first splash, because she married me anyway. And sometimes, when we are out to dinner at a table that is set with a flickering candle, I swear I see a twinkle in Marcia's eye whenever one of the waitstaff asks if they may refill our water glasses.
Yay! Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. I'd like to have you listen to Ann Struck here for a few minutes.
Okay, and my
Let me introduce you. I have Ann has been with us for a while, but she's a very widely published gal. Published poetry, including several prize-winning poems. She's invited to write a poem for Stockton's newspaper, The Record. You've heard of that, I'm sure, even though their circulation has dropped close to zero, to celebrate the opening of Weber Point. Ann has also won a prize for one-act prayer for the fridge. How's that? And one of her 5 petite plays. She has written 2 children's stories, numerous poems for children and adults, and experiments in many writing forms. Ann is currently busy writing a full-length play, and I'm eager to hear from her. Ann.
Thank you. And to honor my mother, I am using her maiden name in my pen name as well, so it's Ann Bishop Struck. This is called Mother's Sweet Tooth. I love my mother dearly. I'm even amused and impressed by her sweet tooth. She was a thin woman, just like her parents and 2 sisters. My Aunt Margaret even cried teenage tears over her perceived imperfection, I was told. Nowadays, she'd be a fashion statement. Mother had champagne tastes in clothing, interior decor, and cuisine. In addition, she savored gourmet candy. Fanny Farmer candies, the best in the Midwest, were Mother's favorite indulgence. But when I moved to California, Mother changed her brand. Fanny Farmer could not compare to the See's candy she tasted on her visits here. But See's had no stores and no mailing service in Michigan at that time. Therefore, every year for Mother's birthday, I always skipped down to the cool 66 to 68 degree, refrigerated, impeccably clean, all black and white store. Once inside, I was greeted by a woman in white shoes and a white dress with black piping. Her uniform was made complete with a large bow at her bosom, pinned on with a silver-framed brooch. The brooch read See's and the woman's name. She treated me to a free chocolate in exchange for the carefully customized, selected 1-pound box that I chose for my mother. Once at home, I faithfully wrapped and addressed the special cargo and delivered it to the post office in time for the birthday every May 13th, the day after Mother's Day. I always arrived at the store with a privatized list of Mother's favorites. She disdained peanuts in favor of expensive fancy nuts like pecans, almonds, and black walnuts. She loved maple flavoring, perhaps since she came from Vermontville, Michigan, a land of maple syrup, where trees were tapped, and each bucket hung on a spile, pounded into its tree in the spring. She liked creams and nuts. She adored divinity fudge. I would consider almond buds, pecan buds, Chelsea's, Mayfair's, milk walnut, Rocky Road, and rum nougat. I peered through glass at almond royal, apricot bonbons, maple pecan bonbons, orange bonbons, Scotch kisses, and walnut rolls. There were milk Bordeaux, butterscotch squares, mochas, and ice cream, strawberry creams. I eyed marzipan, Normandies, mincemeat, and cherry cordials. Over the year, I eventually taste-tested cashew brittle, a summertime, a divinity puff, and others. Always for a fresh approach to her upcoming year, I added a sample of something Mother had never tried, such as a blueberry buttercream truffle, white buttercream with peppermint, or See's very own apple pie truffle, a rich buttercream with Granny Smith apples and cinnamon.
Ah, you're making me hungry.
Despite my heritage of thin body types, neither I nor my brother had the tendency to look as though we were fading away. But year in and year out, I faithfully sent, and my mother always received my annual gift from California with great anticipation and delight. One fine day, I remember telephoning my mother. "Mother," I said, "you won't be receiving a birthday gift this year." "Why?" she asked, perplexed. "I ate it," I said. Thankfully, she laughed, and thankfully for my middle, I was soon able to order online, never again to visit the store for her gift and my free treat.
Thank you. Thank you. Why don't you try another one? Tell us a little bit how you came to write this one.
Well, this is a true story called My Uncle Henry, and is based on the hearsay from my cousin, her daughter, her only daughter. I love my Uncle Henry. Beloved Uncle Henry was a patient, soft-spoken, intelligent man. He would give the shirt off his back to a stranger and his life for his only child, my cousin Benla. One day, aged 84, this once quicksilver ice skater could be found at Benla's house on a hillside in Glendale, California. Always handy, he busied himself making repairs atop the 6-foot retaining wall of her driveway when he suddenly fell, she reported, quote, on his hard German head. His alarmed wife and daughter rushed him to the hospital where he was admitted for observation. "Good morning," said the doctor, entering the room on day 1. "What is your name?" Henry Struck. "What country do you live in?" "The United States," he replied. "Who is the President of the United States?" Henry answered correctly. "What year is it?" Henry knew. "If it is not day, it is what?" the doctor continued. "Night," said the tolerant Henry. "Good," said the doctor. "See you tomorrow." Henry was not free to go. "Good morning," said the doctor, entering Henry's hospital room on day 2. "What is your name?" Henry Struck. "What country do you live in?" "The United States." "Who is the president?" Henry answered correctly. "Good," said the doctor. "See you tomorrow." "Good morning," repeated the doctor on day 3, asking the same questions. Henry answered correctly. "Yes," said the doctor. "See you tomorrow." Henry was not free to go, nor would the doctor release him on day 4. On day 5, the doctor again entered Henry's hospital room. "Good morning," said the doctor. "What is your name?" he began. Henry answered correctly. Suddenly, Henry spoke out of turn. "By God," Henry exploded, "if you don't know by now, you never will." "Mr. Struck," the doctor replied, "you are fit to go home."
Wonderful, wonderful. Really cute.
That is nice. That is nice. How about another one?
Okay, now this is Mother at 91. Bundle of bones, murmured memories, duties remembered, she must buy some bread. "Not now, Mother, the stores are closed." Fears awakened in dreams. "No," I say, "your son's still alive. There was no disaster in Detroit." The long dead, the newly deceased, her husband too, were just lost in Detroit. Mother alone in retirement bed lies tucked with care, flanked by closets of clothes like pharaohs of old, her objects about her. Picture of grandmother, bouquets of roses, heirloom bookends. "Mother, how can I leave you? Say good night. Return to my brother's house. My plane flies away in the morning. I cannot go. I may never be back." I cry in my chair, stay until dawn, so I can say, "Good morning, Mother. I love you."
Well, thank you, Ann. Well, folks, we've got Tom Moy just arrived in the studio, and he'll be here in a minute, and he's going to provide the intro music for our program, and we'll play it anyways.
Intermission music.
Hey, yeah, good. I didn't even know we had such a thing, but it's in intermission. I want to, since we're talking about love, there's a lot of different stages to love and a lot of dimensions to it. When you're very young, we know the experience of young love, of young people, passionate, often reckless. Then there comes a stage of child rearing and getting on with careers and work. And after that, there's a stage of advanced adulthood, maybe perhaps retirement. Some people retire, some don't. And then there's preparation for death. But love invades all of these dimensions of life in perhaps different ways. So we'll continue to explore that as we go along here today. Jim, have you got one that you'd like to add?
Yes, I will. I told you of a date that I had before I was married, and this is a story, a true story, that I wrote quite some time after that, obviously. And I call this the coffee monkey. I am happily married, but it took a new puppy to remind me that humor helps keep a marriage happy. Actually, humor, morning coffee, and a bit of give and take. Our old dog, and I'll set this scene up by noting that our old dog had passed on a while ago. But we have a new dog now. By new, I mean it's new to us. It is a puppy, and we are its first owners. But basically, it's the same old type of dog that will learn only the standard old tricks. We have been teaching this dog to sit, to stay, speak, and shake hands. But I know in my heart I will never be able to teach it to make the morning coffee. In a way, that's okay, because I learned something about my marriage when our old dog died. See, I've been married to Marcia, the love of my life, for over 30 years. As our children are 5 years apart, we found ourselves still raising kids into this 21st century. Last winter, our old dog passed away at 15. They say that's 105 in dog years. Our kids had always had that dog around, so the loss left a big gap when the older ones visit. This spring, our daughter, who is our last child at home and a junior in high school, suggested we get another dog. I said we'd think about it, and then added under my breath, but not very hard, as I mentally calculated how long we'd have that dog after she leaves home. But for several weeks, she kept bringing up the subject whenever she'd run into me in the kitchen during her mad morning dash to grab breakfast and head off to school. Now, I'm in the habit of getting up each morning and fixing the coffee for Marcia and myself. While our old dog was still alive, I'd also let it out and dish up the dog food while I waited for the coffee to finish perking. Then I'd glance at the weekly calendar on the fridge to see if I needed to get down 1 or 2 coffee mugs. Marcia had recently taken on a new job where she sometimes worked an early schedule and sometimes late. On mornings when she could sleep in, she liked to take her coffee later. One morning as I got up, I joked that maybe instead of getting the dog, we should have gotten a monkey and trained it to make the morning coffee. As I exited the bedroom and headed for the kitchen, Marcia's voice, muffled by the covers snuggled over her head, echoed after me. I do have a trained monkey that makes the morning coffee. And I smiled, happy to know she still appreciates me after all these years.
Thank you, thank you. Now we have Tom Moy, who has joined us. Are you ready to play?
Oh, should I play something now?
You want to play the intro, please.
Oh, my goodness.
I should tell you, Tom is a writer also, but he's a musician, and he composed some intro music for us, which is going to turn out to be an intermission music. As I said earlier, he was hung up on the freeway getting down here. He lives in
Sacramento.
in East Sacramento. But Tom is an active researcher and writer in the southwestern U.S. history. And maybe one of these days we'll have a show around his work. Very intriguing. Fire away. Give us some.
All righty.
Thank you. That peps me up and makes me want to actually read stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, I think maybe I got inspired by my choice for a luncheon today. I went to an Irish pub, desperately looking for a fast food place, and they beat my timer. I had set for 20 minutes. When someone tells me, "Oh, we'll get the sandwich ready for you in 20 minutes," I said, "Oh yeah, who's going to be faster, you or the waitress? But they beat me by 20 seconds.
Oh,
And no, I did not compose the song in the pub. I wrote it last night.
my goodness.
But when I was sitting there in the pub, I said, they need a band. And I guess I suffice by playing this. But anyway, I really enjoyed my sandwich, and I'm glad I'd be here. That traffic was terrible.
I bet.
Thank you. We'll have you play again towards the end of the show. I'd like to have Jose pick up again here. I think it's a good time for you to tell about your story and how it relates to the lesson that you gave us.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Yes, I'll be happy to do that. We talked just a while ago as to the elements of fiction, and of course, we talked about the initial scene sets the stage of unraveling the story, the plot, the storyline, the scheme, or intrigue. Character conflict is what introduces the reader to the tale that is to follow, and the first word is as important as the first sentence, the first paragraph, and or the first page. Try to give you an example of something that suddenly breaks the norm and gets the storyline energized. Here is a story I wrote some years ago. The title is The Legacy, A Heritage of Hate. The scene opens with the setting of a restaurant, and it's domiciled in Dublin, California. Some of you may know where that is. Simple paragraph, I'll read that to you. Jake, the manager, was mulatto, half-baked and half who knows what. Pedro, the head cook, was still dripping with evidence of his having waded across the Rio Grande. And Salvatore, the owner, was as Italian as garlic bread at a mafia meeting in upstate New York. Still, with its suffocating stench of burnt tobacco and stained and mildewed carpets beaten down by the tramp of many feet, the place may just as well have been 1,000,000 miles from the cloudy skies of West Berlin. Because it was hosted by waitresses dressed in Bavarian attire, however, it reserved the right to display magnificent paintings of the Rhine and be proudly called the Rhineland Inn. It's that simple. It's just a setting of a restaurant. It's called the Rhineland Inn in Dublin, California. Now it begins to unfold. Valery Zukov, an out-of-state customer, sat in the corner booth across from his friend, Skylar Donovan Malone. Zukov eyed the Bavarian decor and the club-sponsored trophies that lined the entry corridor while grimacing with the scowl of a man driven by his own season in hell. This place would be better called the Grease Bowl. I can't see why they don't just change the name. Or how about the Dirty Spoon? As for me, I'd just as soon go for the leftover buffet. Now that would be far more appropriate, but not the Rhineland Inn. What's wrong with these people today? And what the hell does California have to do with the Rhineland anyway? Again, the conversation begins to take place, and you only see two men sitting in a restaurant talking. Still the norm, still the norm. We go a little farther down, and he's still complaining, and he says, it's a lousy sty, Zukov noted, nodding his head in direction of the teenagers, the glazed look of angst surely felt by a man on the rack. It looks like a sty, stinks like a sty, caters to a sty's clientele, so I call it as I see it. Come on, Val. You're starting to sound like me. Besides, this place has the best sauerkraut in California. What's eating you anyway? With a look of angst and disgust, Zukov nodded toward the rowdy kids. Look, you know you can't just kill those little maggots, Malone replied. At least not in this country. It's against the law. If the founding fathers had seen into the future, they would have made birth control legal a long time ago. He smiled begrudgingly. But it's not like you to sound off like that just because of a group of noisy brats. So what gives? Trying to get the story going. Zukov took a long, deep breath, exhaled slowly, and glanced once more about the teens. Then he wiped his clammy hands with his paper napkin, and he said, Jenna Louise Asher. Nervously, he again uttered the name in a low, grumbling voice while looking away from Malone as though reluctantly sharing some dark and burdensome secret. What? Jenna Louise what? Malone could hardly hear himself above the din. Jenna Louise Asher, Zukov repeated in a low, muffled voice, his eyes darting about as if they were intentionally attempting to avoid direct eye contact with Malone. You serious? Yes. Puzzled, Malone asked, who's Jenna Louise Asher? And again the story unfolds. His hands trembling, Zukov reached into his briefcase at his feet and pulled out a soiled, wrinkled 10 by 12 envelope. He handed it to Malone. Malone slid his coffee cup to the side with the back of his hand, pulled a piece of newsprint out of the envelope and began to read. Some evidence found in killing of local proprietor. Pleasant Hill. Pleasant Hill police continued to search for clues Friday in the slaying of local women who shot twice while making a night deposit at the community bank on Lakeside Drive. Among the evidence they are examining are 3 gun casings found at the scene, believed to be from a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Jenna Louise Asher, 58, was shot in the right arm and abdomen by an unknown assailant who fled by foot Friday night, said Pleasant Police Chief Richard Subia. Asher, sole owner and manager of the Dewdrop Inn Saloon and local oasis for Diablo College students, had walked approximately 100 feet in a darkened alley from the bar to the bank, where she deposited her daily receipts. Witnesses told police that they saw Asher struggle with her assailant, who fired shots during the altercation. The assailant didn't get the deposit bag, which contained approximately $1,000, because Asher managed to put it into the bank slot before she fell. Her purse was found at her side. Malone set the news clippings down, took a slow, deliberate breath, and with a baffled look on his face, tentatively exhaled the words, "Who was Asher a friend of yours?" And the story gets underway. The normal scene of a restaurant. 2 friends having a cup of coffee. Suddenly something happens to change the scene into a problem. Jenna Louise Asher. Here's the letter I received about a killing in Pleasant Hill, California. Who was she? I don't know. Who lives in Pleasant Hill? I don't know. Who could have sent it to you? I don't know. The ball starts rolling. And that's what I mean about the plot. Get the setting. Make sure your word attracts the attention. That's called the hook. Get the hook. People, bring them in. And then let the story unfold. That'll supply for today, I think, Rob.
Yeah,
One of the
thank
things
you.
that I'd like to point out, Jose, is that you, in your opening, you took all the immigrants and you created a pejorative scene, which leads us towards that dark heritage of hate.
Yes.
Yeah, now, I'm no,
Yes.
no spoiler
You're right,
alerts.
you're right.
I know too much about Skylar Malone, but yeah, having read the book.
You're right.
But yeah, I mean, right away you're taking them to the dark side of that 2 men sitting in the back of that
Oh
bar.
yeah. Oh yeah. And Zukov
Yeah.
is
There's a Russian name.
a
for
Russian
you.
name.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Valerie Zukov.
Yeah.
Okay. Skylar Malone is what? The name is
That's
generally
Irish.
Irish. Generally
Yes.
Irish. He's as far from Irish as Ireland is from Germany. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for that. And it was just a thought of getting the storyline underway.
Mm-hmm.
Have something to say. Write about what you know. If you don't know, go do some research. And then develop your characters from people you know. He sat across the table from me. His hair was graying now. He had a small face and came down to a point at the chin. He was wearing a checkered blue suit. You know, you're describing a friend of mine. Let that be one of your characters. Write about people you know, write about things you know, and let the story flow. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Jose. Well, Tom, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I agree. If you don't know the subject, you should do research on it. And in my chosen field of Western American history, I think that goes double. I think a lot of people write from the imagination, and which is great because I mean, allegory and the pictures you can see in your head. That's wonderful, and it makes a great movie. It sells a lot of tickets. But for anyone who's going to take the movie and then extract it and go out and try to find the real event in the real place, they might be sorely disappointed. Maybe they can't even find it. So
I would add that Tom's work in historical writing is more formal and more academic than what we're talking about now. It's full of footnotes and cross-references and et cetera, so that you really know every little detail in his story, where it came from and why it is where it is. And thank you, Tom. Maybe I'll give you a preview. Maybe in the next month or two we'll have him present some of his material. It's very interesting. Let's come back to this stages of love and life again. I have two little poems that I'd like to contribute. The first one I would place in the advanced stage of life. Imagine that you have a man and a woman who have been married a long time. They're tired. Their bodies do not function like teenagers anymore. They have aches and pains, and yet still they love one another. And I call this a prayer of tumescence. It's short. But imagine they say this prayer as a way of trying to prepare to love one another in the way that they maybe should. O Lord, as our bodies transform into passion's needs, grant us the trust and the will to bear our souls through open eyes. Let us see each other in the radiance and glory we have earned through transformation in the heat of life's crucible. Let our coupling move us to that highest passion where profound quiet preludes are bursting into ecstasy by your presence. Amen. I'd like to read the last one for you. The last one for me, anyways. And this is about the stage of life that maybe precedes or is during death. And I call it a good night prayer. Imagine a person kneeling over their spouse. Good night, my dear. Good night. I will be along very soon. It was a good run, you and I did it all. I remember when those best of times, the worst of times, the sickness and the radiance. We had money and we were broke. Yes, my love, a very good life. Now, I kiss your cooling forehead. Your eyelashes do not flutter as they did so many years ago. Yet life and strife go on, and I'm still so in love with you, and still bound to you yet alone. So good night, my dear love, good night. I will be along very soon.
Nice, Robert. Very nice.
Let's see, do we have any follow-on to your material? How about you? You want to add another one or so?
I have a very short one, and you can think stages about this too, a stage. This is called Love to Laura. I lay you in my single arm, you fit. I stroke your brow above those eyes I'll never see, and touch your eyelids with my lips to bless them closed. I pull you to my body and shield you from the world with my hands. I clutch you to my breast, precious treasure. Your mother loves you and holds you forever to her heart.
Yeah, amen. Beautiful. Yes, if you'd like me to share. Thank you,
Sure,
Robert.
sure.
All right.
I know you have love in your body and your soul.
Very rarely.
This is from one of Jose's other novels.
Yes, thank
So,
you. A little bit about the novel itself. It's called Francisco Ducia's The Dead-Eyed Deuce. The Dead-Eyed Deuce is in fact a play on his last name, Ducia's. Francisco Ducia's personal experiences with the many biases opposing him and his impoverished family of migrant workers inflames within him a will to win that cannot be contained. His experiences fall into a scholarship awarded him by Cal Berkeley's English department. At Cal, Ducia's is mischievously dubbed the Deuce by a friend and roommate. Later, through a quirk of fate, in a bet against a group of upperclassmen, Ducia's is derogatorily tagged as the Dead-Eyed Deuce, a tag which he determines to wear as a scarlet letter to his pride. You see, has achieves that pride when at the close of his junior year, he finds young love and returns to San Antonio as a college All-American and as a reigning inter-college bowling champion. There's a scene that is directly from that storyline, and I'll simply take a segment beginning with page 89. "Where you headed, kid?" asked James. "Going out with Kara," came the brusque reply as he continued his grooming preparations. "Who is this Kara?" asked Des. "Oh, just someone on the bowling team, an especially skilled bowler. Carries a 195 average in competition. We're going to work on my lane-to-lane adjustments," he replied as he strolled out into the night. One evening, James and Des followed the Deuce from afar to his appointed rendezvous at Albany Lanes, only to be overcome by a sense of culpability for prying on their loyal and trusted friend. While the Deuce and Kara were unwavering in their attentiveness to the demands of their bowling performance, they were also oblivious to the magnetism drawing them to each other. And while it may be said that the whole world loves a lover, the whole world of the Berkeley world of bowling seemed transfixed in beholding this evolving relationship. Both fine bowlers to be certain, but finer still to note how each cared for the other. Indeed, it was in moments such as these that they grew to a cognizance of who they were and who they were becoming in the context of the maddening world of university concern. They delighted in their season of study together, and invariably there was a reciprocal regard for each other's efficacy in the classroom as on the lanes of bowling competition. Then, too, there were the Deuce's poems, which he would compose under the inspiration of the Romantics. The Deuce enjoyed the pleasure of toying with both poetry and prose, but then he was an English major with emphasis on English literature. His compositions were thus shared with the anticipated chuckle of benevolent amusement of them both. On one such recital, however, the Deuce encountered an unexpected reaction to the sharing of a few innocent expressions of love. The two had consumed the morning on one of their routine botanical garden talks and walks beneath the serene and cloudless Berkeley sky. They paused for a moment under the lone oak tree, which had served as an accomplice to one of the Deuce's former acts of mischief. The Deuce raised his hands while placing them on his chest, looked into Kathleen's wonderful emerald eyes, and said, "Hands that have been darkened by the suns of many summers can be gentle too. A heart that beats to the sound of a Latin drum can also die for want of you." To his amazement, there were no chuckles emanating from Kathleen's lips on this occasion. Rather, tears were now forming on her beautiful, radiant eyes. Then, as though surrendering to a passion unseen, the Deuce slowly and deliberately lowered his face till his forehead touched hers, then gently pressed his lips to hers while cradling her face in his hands.
That's very lovely. Thank you. Thank you. I like that.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, let's see. Where are we on the scheme of things? We've got a few minutes left. Let me tell you a little bit about the Heritage Writers. We meet at the Hagen Museum monthly. And we have a variety of writing genres that just keep popping up and emerging, and new people come in and they introduce new material. And it's really been quite an interesting exercise for all of us. We've been there, about 14 years now. We've been plugging away at this thing. I know.
I can't imagine it was that long. I was with you when we began.
Right. And we're getting tired. You can maybe tell that. But anybody, you're all invited to come down and join us. Really, what do you get out of it, Jim?
Myself? Well, as I've mentioned in some of our meetings, as we would sometimes produce a chapbook, and that's a collection of poetry and prose.
This is some of the ones that he's produced. Jim has been in charge of doing all this stuff, the hard work of editing.
I don't know how many times I
composing
pushed a staple into my thumb, but yeah. So it's our work, and quite often it is driven by a traveling exhibit that is about to come to the Hagen, and that forced us to come up either with new works we already had that met that theme, or sometimes it just jarred a memory And I think back to one which was on the equestrian of the Mexican equestrians, all of their gear, their saddles, their sombreros, and that brought back to me a story that I had forgotten, yet it was in the back of my head of I have 6 brothers, so my parents always looked for an inexpensive but entertaining place to go, and we went to the LaGrange Rodeo the year it hit 500 people. And now it's such a huge rodeo that they bring in law enforcement from like 3 counties to just control the crowds. But that is what it's kept me inspired to pull old stories out and to consider new stories. I've dabbled in poetry because you can hear how well Jose reads a poem that he's written. It just has been, I consider him a mentor. We lost a member, Professor Duffett from Delta College, but he worked on a poem with me that he didn't like the phrasing I'd used. He thought I was being too meek, too mild. And so it's helped me, so very much so.
Thank you.
Robert.
Tom, what have you gotten out of it? Because none of us are professional historians, but I think what we've been trying to help Tom with is how to use some of the techniques of fiction writing, where you try to, as Jose was pointing out, how you structure and develop characters, even if you're trying to talk about real characters, you can still bring in the sensory details and the background and the shaping of the activity. So have we been successful?
Well, I think that you've touched upon some of the things that the Heritage Writers community has impacted me. Before that, I was just writing the facts, which is kind of bare. And as you say, you need to kind of fill out the flesh, otherwise it's a skeleton. And
Yes.
People want to know, for example, when I was writing my piece, it was actually a talk I was giving about Yuma Territorial Prison. And you said, well, where is it located besides, the town of Yuma? And you kind of want to describe the prison, not just leave it to someone's imagination. And so, because every prison is not the same, they're all different. And so I wrote something. I said, well, I didn't know that. They wanted to know that. So I started to write. And so I think that things like that have helped me to inform me about my writing and to, to be more explicit and more descriptive. Because you can't, otherwise you just leave it to the reader's imagination. And that's not what historical writing is about. You should be telling people what really happened and what it really looks like. So I've learned about some of those techniques about describing and transitioning between paragraphs and things, because it has to be smooth. Otherwise, it's just interrupting. Each break is just interruptive.
Right.
And I know this sounds elemental. I'll get it right.
Elementary.
To the readers, to the listeners who say, well, gee, you would think that would be like basic. Well, that's where I was when I came to the group. I was learning the basic stuff because I had not written before for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a supervisor, but writing reports and that kind of thing was more to what I was doing already, which was writing the skeleton, not writing a description. So telling a story is really important, and it's creative nonfiction. Yes, that's the thing that I'm learning.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's bringing us close to the end of our program here. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to have Tom play a little more music to kind of mellow this out and put you back at ease again after this tortuous hour of stimulation and intrigue. But it was a fun day today, and we hope you enjoyed listening to us. Hope you come back to our next show. I'm not sure when that's going to be, but whenever it is, tune us in. We'll be glad to see you.
I think our republic has had quite a bit of bashing these last several weeks. So I hope that I can do something that will help soothe the listener and in this country. So it's a familiar song, which is dangerous because that means you can't screw up.
Yes, very good.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Goodbye.